Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. All right, I'm here this week with Carleton University's Stephanie Carvin. Because we are hearing about this Grifter Convoy of truckers who are coming to Ottawa. They're just arriving here as we're recording this, so by the time this goes out to the general public, they may or may not still be here. But anyway, happy to have you, Steph.
Thanks for having me back on.
So one of the things I really noticed about this is that the organizers of this convoy, quote unquote, have this memorandum of understanding that they claim they have these constitutional lawyers drafting up, which the stated aim is to essentially overthrow the government. It wants to have the prime minister resign, dissolve the House of Commons, and then have the country be governed by fiat by some committee of these organizers, along with a group of senators and the governor general, which is constitutionally insane. But we're seeing this kind of quasi-legalistic means being used in other extremist groups as well. So I was wondering if this is something that you can maybe shed some light on.
So yeah, I mean, it is really interesting. I mean, a movement that was started off supposedly just about being about a very specific political grievance, which, you know, fair that we live in a democracy. You don't have to like everything that goes on. About trucker mandates suddenly became about all mandates, which then has now, as you said, among some of the participants and certainly even some of the organizers of this convoy have been suggesting that, you know, this is going to be an MOU and they're going to take it to, I guess, the Senate and the Governor General. And as you say, it's complete nonsensical arguments. And you know, I was actually discussing the MOU with some of my co-authors for some reports on violent extremism and in its relationship to this kind of anti-lockdown movement. And we came up with a couple of things. First of all, because of this sentiment that we see being expressed, we decided that we can't even really call it an anti-lockdown movement now. It's almost shifting to an anti-government movement. And so just the actual nature of it is there. So, you know, I keep seeing people on TV calling it this this vaccine mandate that they're upset about truckers. I'm like, no, guys, keep up. This is changed. This is different now.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. That then the second thing we looked at was the language being used and some of the pseudo-legal arguments that I would describe it. And we had a debate as to whether or not this could be ascribed to a movement, not a group, but a movement called the sovereign citizen movement, sometimes also referred to as the freemen on the land. Yeah. And they tend to use they take treaties and they take, you know, it's always the Magna Carta. Yes. No one's actually read the Magna Carta, but they always invoke the Magna Carta. Yes. They always use, the Constitution. Sometimes the Finland Declaration. I think the Helsinki Declaration.
Helsinki comes up a lot, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that refers to the three baskets that were negotiated between the West and the Soviet Union back in the Cold War. I think. So yeah, there's a number of different documents that are used to make these kind of arguments that either laws don't apply or the government's illegitimate. Or these kinds of things. And we had a debate over whether or not this was actually doing that. And the reason that's important, and I apologize for the rant here, but the reason that's important is that sovereign citizens are associated with a lot of violence in Canada and the United States, right? Like sovereign citizens have probably killed more police officers than any other extremist group or motivated group, at least in the United States in the 2010s. These are people who believe that the law just simply doesn't apply to them, that they're their own citizens. And then there's a whole bunch of variations on this theme. There was a killing, I believe the man's name was Raditz out in Edmonton in the mid 2010s of a person, and he kind of did a little bit of I don't like the term suicide by cop, but he was in an altercation with police officers and I think he actually ended up killing one, and he himself was killed when this house caught on fire. And he ascribed to a lot of this kind of sovereign citizen views as well, right? Using these arguments about what laws apply to him and what don't. And so what's interesting about this is that this phenomenon has been described as organized pseudo-legal commercial arguments, or OPCA, in the courts, because the other problem is, aside from the fact that individuals who firmly believe that the law, that, you know, society's corrupt, it's like an evil corporation, that they're free people, they tend to engage in sometimes, not all, sometimes engage in extremist violence, but also they tend to tie up our legal system with very specious arguments and things like that. So that's what we see here. And so I apologize, it took a while to get there, but
it's
yeah,
good
so
to have this background.
Yeah, and so like there's this. This isn't like, to be clear, this isn't a sovereign citizen argument. We have seen other groups who are anti-lockdown employ very much sovereign citizen language, particularly those associated with the QAnon movement, and the Romana Didulo and her followers, and you know, saying that basically people who engage in vaccine giving out vaccines are engaged in war crimes and things like this. That's not this, but it has that vibe to it, right? Like, we're just going to pick and choose what we think is the law and then try to apply it in order to get rid of the things we really don't like.
Yeah. And that's something that you're right. It's that same kind of flavor that I find is being employed here. And it's interesting. I was going to say, like this notion about finding ways about overturning the government or suspending democracy because you don't like things the way they're going isn't even entirely exclusive to the left or to the right. On the left, Extinction Rebellion, that's one of their basic tenets is suspend democracy and have citizens' assemblies run everything. So it's interesting, though. I just find, that this kind of pseudo-legalistic language is being used in this way by these kinds of groups in order to, I don't know if it's to impart some kind of like legitimacy on their arguments, or if it's something deeper that I'm not necessarily understanding.
It's hard to say. Like, I mean, like what the motivation is. This may be like a sincerely held belief, right? This may be like people who actually believe that this is the way that the government works and that they can remake, you know, this idea of, you know, a bunch of patriotic citizens coming together to reform the government goes very much inspired by the United States, the American Revolution. Of course, not at all how Canada works at all. You know, but it's interesting. I think some of these ideas have percolated from the United States up to Canada with the view of creating change. I mean, the anti-lockdown movement, or this new anti-government movement, is something we've seen really thrive with transnational links, right? These ideas. And this is why we've actually seen so much support from abroad. You know, I've unfortunately spent a lot of time in the forums and looking at their social media, and they're getting a lot of, you know, at least it looks like they're getting a lot of support from other countries, Australia, Britain, definitely the United States, big social media influencers, Joe Rogan, Elon Musk. I don't think Rob Schneider counts, but he's there. So like there's a lot of this going on. And so, it's really interesting to see where this goes. I suppose, like, I've written a piece last summer after, you know, people threw rocks at the prime minister's head, or gravel, or whatever you want to call it. And they said, you know, what we're seeing is a shift now from politics where, you know, people have an argument and they have an opponent, and the basis of that, you know, disagreement is a political one, right? Like, I want to spend more on healthcare and you don't. I want higher taxes and you don't. It's gone from that to, my opponent is evil and a traitor, and they can't be, you know, we can't solve our issue through politics. We either have to remake the government, put everyone in jail, put everyone on trial. And in some cases, you know, in some of the more extreme movements like QAnon in particular, you see this desire for mass executions. And that's something that's really odd to me, like just this constant desire to want to see bloodshed. Now, I want to be really clear, like, we've gone down this path. This isn't what the MOU is arguing for.
Right. Yeah.
But is there a shared kind of umbrella that kind of either connects or, like, you know, speaks to an influence? I would say this is an anti-political. It's not quite anti-political, because it does seem to be wanting to use political institutions, but do so in a way that just is inherently unworkable, unreasonable, and illegal, impractical, like literally everything that you can't do.
Yeah. And one of the things I find has been really interesting over the last number of years is the way in which treason has suddenly become, the word of the day in order to describe your political opponents. And I don't know how much or like where this particular mode is coming from. And I'm wondering if this is something that you've seen in certain forums that kind of have distributed through networks, or if this is just something that's kind of entered into the discourse somehow and it's been picked up and run away with.
I think, what's really interesting is that, there's been some good journalism on this. Justin Ling in particular has, been trying to look at the roots of where this convoy came from and where it is. Apparently this is MOUs existed since the summer. So it's not a new thing, but it's become a part of this movement. And now we've seen hundreds of thousands of people sign on to it. I mean, I'm always in two minds about this, right? Because it's, in the media cover, and you're a journalist, so you know better than me, but I mean, and I'd be interested actually in hearing your view on this. But like, you want people to know what's out there. And, one of the things this week, I've been tweeting a lot about this and trying to write a lot about this and commenting a lot about this, because I feel people need to know this isn't just a truck convoy. This is something very different with some roots in some very disturbing places. But I do worry that it amplifies, right? So it's like, when we talk about this MOU, is it a good thing or a bad thing? And in my case, I think it's a good thing, because I think it shows very much in 4 pages who these people are and what they want and what their general understanding is. And so like, but it's always the back and forth, like with regards to amplification. Like in terms of this document, I think it's okay to share, but I was really concerned this week when I saw reporters directly linking to the pages of either the GoFundMe or the, in the case of one particular group calling for January 6th, there were direct links to their YouTube channel. And nope, don't do that. So it's a very tricky thing to also cover. So I'm here to be interviewed, I guess, but like, what's your view on that?
This isn't the kind of stuff I normally cover, so I don't know all of the ground rules around it, essentially. But I do find that there is a particular need in a lot of media outlets to both sides issues, and rather than deconstructing them or showing that not every side deserves equal mention or to be treated as though it's got a similar weight. And I think that's kind of an impulse that a lot of media outlets have a hard time getting their heads around. And that's kind of where I think we need to think in our own industry about, we shouldn't be both sidesing this. We shouldn't be treating this in a way that will amplify it, because that's giving them the ammunition that they're looking for. That's giving them what they're looking for, and they're using us for their own ends. And I think that is a problem, but I'm one voice in an industry that's not exactly a monolith either. So.
Right. No, it's hard. Right. And so like, I think there's just standard good practices around this. Like instead of sharing, if you don't have to share a link, share a screen capture. Share, if they, instead of directly linking to something, can you link to a report about it? Can you rely on the research think tanks that have, produced reports about these movements rather than directly linking to them? I always think that's a pretty good way to do it. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird when you directly link to the MOU. I mean, I would actually, in this odd case, encourage people to read it, because it is an interesting insight into this movement and what they think they can accomplish. But also it makes me kind of worried in that, like, I have every hope that this will go off peacefully. There's definitely people who don't want it to go off peacefully. And, when we see language like January, this, like, let's make this Canada's January 6th, let's hang politicians, let's, we got to put them all in jail. But even like, this idea of that this is a siege. Right. This is not political. This is not protest. This is a siege. That to me is concerning. Like, what happens? Like, okay, we have 3 days of bad traffic in Ottawa in January, which, okay, everyone's working from home, have fun. But if this lasts, right, and these guys eventually realize, okay, none of these demands are going to be met, what happens, right?
Yeah.
Like what happens next? And that's going to be a really challenging thing.
The other thing I wonder about is we have MPs, primarily from the Conservatives, who are somewhat endorsing this, and they're trying to play
wholeheartedly endorsing it.
This cute game of, we don't endorse the extremists, but we endorse the hardworking truckers, even though this whole thing was basically organized by the extremists. And what that particular kind of too cute by half message kind of does, or what's the message that sends in your estimation?
So, I mean, I do feel bad for the Conservatives in the sense that, like, they're literally in a civil war. It feels like all the time with each other. And I think this is just the latest issue in which this is being used, and possibly to challenge the leadership of Erin O'Toole, although I'm hardly an insider. But I would say that the interesting thing that is happening here, or the important thing to remember, is that what we've seen in the US, and I guess we're not going to learn the lessons of history, but what we saw in the US happen was mainstream politicians try to adopt extremist rhetoric for the purpose of gaining political support. And what ends up happening is that those extremists use the legitimation and then still reject the mainstream politicians anyways, right? Yeah. They just they use the politicians to their own advantage, and then they try to shift the Overton window of what's an acceptable idea. And then once that's done, they continue to support their extremism, or they won't necessarily support the political party. So, I understand why they want to do this, right? I mean, you have a movement that is just so full of energy right now. These people are worked up. These people have been in their houses for 2 years. They are ready to go. And it generated $6 million in a week.
And that's one of the things that really struck out to me, is that they also want a piece of that particular financial pot. Financial
and energy and enthusiasm, right? Because no one's particularly enthused about any political party right now. And we're seeing that in the polls. And the fact is that we really need the politicians to kind of play the long game here. And they're not good at playing the long game. And that's a real issue, right? Like, you think you're going to get something out of this, you're not. It's going to cost you a lot more in the long run. But, when you throw $6 million and a bunch of really enthusiastic people in front of an issue, that's what happens, right? Yeah. That this is what happens. So that's the unfortunate bit, but I don't think this is going to end. And this is the other point here, that with luck, we don't have violence. And again, I appreciate most people will be watching this after the fact. So with luck, we don't have violence. But even if there isn't violence, there's an issue here, right? We now have a movement driven by Western separatist extremists, people who've expressed, vehemently anti-Semitic, racist, Islamophobic views. And they are now a well-networked movement that has successfully organized an event. Yeah. They have the contact information for people. They have Facebook groups that are hundreds of thousands of people big, and they're going to pursue something. Now, what happens? Does this movement, what does it become? Does it fall under the weight of its own contradictions because there's going to be so many people trying to claw at this pie? Or does it become something that actually has legs? And if so, what do they turn their attention to next? Because today it's allegedly about the pandemic. It's not, but it allegedly. But in the past, the United We Roll convoy, which said it was kind of about oil and gas and carbon tax and stuff, was really But that movement, the Yellow Vest movement, was really a conspiracy-driven movement that believed that the Global Compact on Migration was some kind of white genocide plan to replace Canadians, right? And
Andrew Scheer recited those talking points.
100%, because he thought he could jump into this, right? Yeah. I mean, he thought people think that they can control the lion. They can't. The lion is hungry, and the lion is going to turn around and eat your face off. And that's the big point. So what I worry about with that is, is this movement going to go back to its roots in promoting, very virulently anti-Semitic, Islamophobic conspiracy theories about the United Nations or something like that? And that's a potential. So this could be a force to reckon with for some time in the future. It's interesting. A year ago, just over a year ago now, I was asked, could January 6th happen in Canada? And I was like, I had some great insight into this, but at the time I said, there's no movement in Canada or political figure that I think could rally a support of this nature.
Mm-hmm.
And that has changed. And that has clearly changed. So we're now in a situation where we are making, like, whether or not, I want to be really careful with the January 6th comparison.
Yeah.
But are we in that world now? Probably. And that's not a good thing for Canadian politics.
Absolutely not. All right. Well, you've given us a lot to chew over. And thanks so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
Hey, I'm always happy to be the nightmare fuel.
All right. Thanks.
Cheers.
And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. That's at journo_Dale on Twitter. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.